get enough of my intro, you should check out Relica. They are the masterminds behind the Educate Ebony podcast introduction, and it has been 3 years since their album Eventide came out. Amazing album. I would highly recommend listening to it. Specifically, Hangman, The Halfway Point, and Earthbound are my faves on that album. Go check them out. Spotify, Relica. But yeah, another episode of Educate Ebony, the metal edition. 3 episodes left. Whew, counting down. Last week I spoke to Chris Smith from Melbourne band Loon, and he told me to listen to a Tesseract album, Altered State to be particular. And yeah, I do like Tesseract. I have heard some of their stuff, but I've never listened to this album before. And God, it was so good. I have to say, the first time I listened to it, obviously what in the dark as per listening notes. You know, I'm not looking at my phone. You just put it down and listen. You listen all the way through. And eventually, I think one time I checked where I was up to and I was like, oh, cool, I got 2 songs to go. Didn't check how long that would take. So I'm listening and I reckon it's been like another 20 minutes. So then I check and I've basically started the entire album again because it's just rolled, it's just flowed right on through. I think that's how you know it's good. So yeah, very easy listening, very easy to get lost. I think I would need to listen to that album many, many more times to fully hear everything that's going on. And I'd be happy to. You know what? I can't even tell you what songs I liked the best because it all just flowed into one and I wasn't sitting there going, oh, this is when this song starts and this is when it ends and I like that. There's a great saxophone section in there. Really liked that. I have to say though, you do definitely notice Nocturne. That's the one song that definitely stood out. I don't know what they do. Is it bass? Is it just guitar in a low tuning or something? But that intro is powerful. Wow. Yes. Man, no one sounds like Tesseract. If you haven't listened to Altered State, go check it out. But let's get to this episode. It is a bit lengthy, more so than my usual format. But you know what? You just get to listen to it on the way to work and on the way home from work. Or just block out an entire hour of your day somewhere this week and chuck it on. But okay, so for episode 21 of Educate Ebony, the metal edition, I would love to introduce Daniel Furnari. You probably know him as the drummer extraordinaire and creative mind behind Australia's most loved metalcore band Polaris, but he's also a bit of a chef, a drum teacher, and a Twitch streamer. So Dan, welcome to the podcast.
That was a lovely intro. Thank you, Ebony. I appreciate that a lot.
Oh, it's great to have you.
I have to correct a few things there. I'll say amateur chef and food enthusiast.
Food enthusiast, okay.
I'll say one of the creative minds in Polaris because it is a very collaborative band. We've got a lot of big brains in the band, putting in a lot of ideas. Yeah, and thank you for having me on here. I'm stoked to do this. Stoked to talk about a bit of a classic album,
Ooh.
a bit of Chinwag.
Oh, I'm ready. I do want to ask about your culinary experiences quickly because you do post sometimes on Instagram, and I have a little look. You post some good things. How are the cooking adventures going? Do you listen to a certain band, album? What's your cooking vibe like?
I mean, cooking thing's big for me. Yeah, it's become. I love that. It's apparently I have a rep for it now, just because I post Instagram stories when I cook fun stuff, and then I mean, I've always kind of been into cooking. I grew up in a family with a lot of good cooks in it. My dad's side of my family is Sicilian, so if you're at all familiar with that culture, Southern Italians are very, very intense about their food, and it's how they show love. So that's how I'd say I've kind of grown up around a lot. And then my mum's side of the family are also terrific cooks as well. Yeah, and I got somewhat into cooking when I was younger, and it became a bit of a nice little side hobby. Kind of my relaxing time now. It's my peace time. I like to just chuck some music on. Recently, it's been like I put something on when I'm cooking that's usually not metal, because I feel like it's like I will cook and listen to metal, but I tend to listen to maybe stuff outside of the heavier stuff that I've been like waiting to digest a little bit and just kind of want to vibe to a little bit more. So recently it's been anything from like Anderson .Paak. What else has been on the list? I had a friend give me like a really great hip hop playlist recently with a bunch of stuff that he was trying to he was doing a little bit of an educate Dan, if you will.
Nice.
On classic
Just doesn't
hip-hop.
flow as well, but I'll allow it.
And, the alliteration isn't there, but it'll do. So and he gave me all this stuff like D'Angelo and like Erykah Badu and some really, really great like R&B stuff that I hadn't heard before. I've also been listening recently been really enjoying Stand Atlantic and who else recently? Stand Atlantic's great. Man, my mind's going a little bit of a blank right now, but I feel like it is more of a time. Generally I will put on something a little bit less heavy.
Yeah.
And just kind of, yeah, just something that can kind of slow my brain down a little bit and just have a little bit more of a chill.
Yeah.
It's the cooking thing's funny too, because it started for me as, sorry, I mean in regards to doing it like it being like an online thing, which apparently it is now. It started with kind of me just posting Instagram stories, when I was making stuff that I was stoked about or experimenting with something new or, going really hard on a big book or something. And people got really psyched about it. And then when I said I was going to do drum Twitch, someone was like, cooking Twitch? And I was like, why not? It's like, it's just more, for me, it's almost just an excuse to get more streams in, because if I'm going to be doing it anyway, that's kind of my approach to streaming is I just do things that I would be doing otherwise and stream them. So I literally don't practice drums now except for streaming. So I teach, I teach all day, like 3 days a week. So I'm playing drums all the time. But when I want to just practice and jam, I just get on Twitch and do it with some company. Same thing with cooking, which is really nice.
Oh, that's beautiful. I like it.
Yeah, just good to kind of vibe and talk some shit with friends and strangers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the strangers become friends on Twitch too, but you get the same people coming in over and over again, and you just have these screen names that you can't attach a face to, but they're really lovely people.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's so good. It's nice to listen to music that isn't heavy, but we are here for a heavy metal education, I guess. So
Yes, yeah.
I'm ready. Hit me with it. What is the one metal album I need to hear?
I was tossing around a couple, and so I've landed on, after tossing around a couple of different albums by this band, and also I was looking at doing an album by Lamb of God. I came back to Avenged Sevenfold because that was the first metal band I ever really dove into myself. They were definitely like the gateway band for me from punk music and pop punk and more general rock music into the metal area. And I know they were the same for a lot of kids my age too. Like the more I talk to people close in age to myself who are touring or working in the industry, in the heavy side of things, so many of us kind of transitioned into metal with bands like Avenged and also My Valentine, like Atreyu. Those three bands I feel like at that time were so foundational to this like borderline mainstream metalcore movement, which sounded a little bit different to what metalcore sounds like now, but it really was like, it was building off bands like Killswitch Engage as well, and like the European metal bands as well, like your At the Gates and In Flames and all of those guys who kind of laid the foundation for this guitar harmony work. But I think those bands were really, Avenged and Bullet and Atreyu and some of the other bands from that scene particularly just like blew it up to like this big and visible level. And they had this really kind of colorful, like really over the top kind of rock star scene and attitude, which was, these days seems a little cheesy, but at the time I think it just made it very exciting and accessible to like a younger fan who is kind of discovering these larger than life characters from these big bands, and they blend the screaming and the singing and the guitar harmonies together in a way that's so digestible maybe to a kid, or like a teenager at that time. So I mean, for me, at the age that, music was just becoming increasingly important to me, there's this album, City of Evil by Avenged Sevenfold, which was totally changed my life. So I reckon, that's the one I got to talk about today.
Cool. I'm excited. Again, never listened to it. So tell me everything.
All right. Okay. Do you know anything about the band or?
I know nothing. I know nothing about Avenged Sevenfold.
All right. Yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a diehard for like the first 3 albums of this band particularly. The later stuff, I definitely appreciate it, but I think it was definitely like a time and a place, those records for me, where they just landed in the right spot of what I needed to hear at that time. So let me think back. So I kind of had to do a little Googling myself actually and remember like just, really piece exactly like where in my life I would have been at that time. So it dropped in 2005, I believe. And so I was in year 6 at the time. And so I was about 12 years old. And I think at the time, music had really become the biggest thing in my life, probably when I was about 11 or so, when I picked up drums and guitar and got really, really heavily into bands like, Green Day and Blink-182. And then, then stuff like, say, Linkin Park and My Chemical Romance and bands like that was so huge and visible at that time. And me and all my best friends in primary school started our first band, And
Cute.
we used to cover, yeah, just cover literally pretty much every Green Day song. And that was about it. And yeah, and so we were all kind of obsessed with music at that time. And then when I went to high school, around that time, I think I remember my cousin, he'd gone to some kind of festival or a show. I think he went to like Taste of Chaos Australia or something like that, or one of my cousins did, and came back with this compilation CD. And it was called, I think it was called A Proper Introduction. And I just Googled it just now. I can't find it anywhere. Obviously a hard thing to Google and actually find something specific, right? If you Google a proper introduction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was Googling like, a proper introduction, hardcore sampler, emo sampler, compilation, couldn't find anything. I'm sure I'll dig it up somewhere. But essentially, yeah, it was a compilation. I don't know what record label or labels might have put it together, but it had maybe like 10 or 15 tracks from a bunch of different signed, when I say upcoming, I mean just like not yet mainstream, but like, big within the scene. Bunch of bands like that. So I'm pretty sure it had like Taking Back Sunday, Mike Hem, probably some Atreyu. Can't remember who else, but yeah, it had a ton of really good bands on it. And I borrowed this compilation off my cousin, and a few of the bands I instantly loved. And a few of them I was like not sure how to get my head around. And, the heaviest thing I'd really heard at that time was maybe like System of a Down, maybe.
Yeah.
Up to that point. And yeah, and so System of a Down, obviously you get these little kind of elements of screaming every now and then. And Linkin Park as well had those elements and stuff. But I hadn't really heard, bands that were really more built around the heavier vocal styles and stuff, or more technical guitar work as well. That was another thing. So I had this compilation and I was hearing all these bands and kind of just, at that age when you don't know if you get something yet, you don't even know if you like it, but it makes you feel like a kind of an adrenaline rush because it's new and it's kind of scary and exciting. So I would kind of cycle those songs, and then eventually you just start to love them, those songs that were a little bit too insane and heavy for you. And I remember one of the songs on that record was this song called Blinded in Chains by Avenged Sevenfold. And it wasn't, funnily enough, it's not a song that has screaming on it, because there's no screaming in this record. And I guess why I keep coming back to the screaming thing is, yeah, I genuinely didn't enjoy screamed vocals at that time. It was like, I thought it was rubbish. And then, yeah, honestly, I did, just like my mom. And just like my mom does. That one was funny because although some of the other ones was like, oh, these vocals are too heavy, this was like a different type of vocal that was, again, different. It was kind of hard to process. So like, this record is entirely clean vocals, but they're a really unusual and like really unique style. And yeah, meanwhile, I'm kind of getting into all of these bands that are introducing me to the screaming thing. And then I'm also hearing Avenged, who, although I didn't realize it, this was their first time moving away from screamed vocals, really, into permanently doing sung vocals. But all I was hearing was just this guy with this really kind of like gnarly, gritty rock voice that kind of sounded a little bit like, I don't know, now I can look back and compare it almost to like Axl Rose or something like that. But at the time, I didn't even know what to compare his voice to. But I didn't know what I was hearing. Like, it was just so overwhelming. Like that song, I think it's maybe the third song on the record or something. Actually, no, I have the track list here. What is it? It's the third song on the record. And it's insane. Like when I first heard it, I had literally never heard double kick drumming before in any form. So I'd seen double pedals in the shops, and I'd seen kits with 2 bass drums on them, but I didn't know what they were for. Like, I just didn't know why you would do that, because drummer play bass drum with right foot. It's just like I was just like, what are they doing? And I was like, okay, so I guess they play it with both feet, but I didn't know any context that you would do that. I'd never heard a song that utilized that. So in my mind, that was just some weird little thing that some guys do to be flashy. And then I heard this song, and it's full of like blazing fast double kick. Like, still to this day, this song is a benchmark to me for drums. And I've been trying to play this song for like 15 years. Yeah, I legitimately didn't know what I was hearing, because the way he was playing the kicks, I just didn't fathom in my head that could be a kick drum, because you can't do that with a kick drum. And I just thought he had really, really weird, like flat sounding toms. I was just like, is he just racing around the toms, but they sound really shit? Like, what is this? I don't understand it. And then again, it was one of those things I kept coming back because this song was so intense and so insane. And it wasn't just the drums. It was, this weird, gnarly vocal style. And then there's the guitar work, which is phenomenal. Like the song opens with, it has like a double introduction And then the second part of the introduction is just like a blazing double time thrash solo. In fact, it's almost like 2 solos before the vocals come in. It opens with like a dueling guitar solo and then goes into a really shreddy solo at double time. It's just so ambitious, you know, like to look at a band like that that would do that much guitar work at blazing speed with all these harmonies and double kick before you even get to a verse. And it was, you know, I'd never really heard a song even structured like that.
Wow.
Like the structures of their songs are so, on that record or in general, but that record, the structures are insane. Like no song is shorter than 5.5 minutes. The longest song is almost 10 minutes.
Nice.
So yeah, it's, you know, to a kid that age, it's just like to go from hearing, you know, the kind of mainstream nu metal bands that I'd been kind of introduced to and stuff. And when I say nu metal, I guess I'm including, say, yeah, System of a Down in that, whether you consider them nu metal or not. But like, you know, these bands that were, you know, they were weird, super weird, but they weren't writing 7.5 minute songs about fighting dragons. And it's like, to hear that, it's just very, just kind of really shifts your perspective on what rock music can incorporate, you know what I mean? So yeah, sorry, I'm rambling a lot there, but that's, yeah, that's, I guess, the story of how I heard it. I suppose though, what happened from there though, is it kind of got in my head. And then a year or so later, I remember being on my bus on the way home from school. And there was a guy who I caught the bus with who was a drummer. He was a couple of years older than me. And he used to kind of just like we used to talk about drums because we were the only other people on the bus who could talk about our favorite topics. So, and one day he was just like, "What are you listening to?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, like, yeah, Fall Out Boy or something." And he was like, "Nah, listen to this." And he like gave me some headphones and I was like, "Oh, I've heard this band before." And he was like, "Yeah, it's Avenged Sevenfold, dude. It's fucking awesome." And I was like, "What's he doing?" And he was like, "That's double kicks." He's like, "That's what," and I think this guy had probably like, I remember he had bought a double pedal right around that time and he was really excited about it, or he was about to buy one. And he was like, "Yeah, double kicks, man. I'm buying these Tama Iron Cobras." And I was like, "I'll get those." Cool. Like, all right, man, I'm sold. I am sold. And I was like, he's doing all that with his feet? Holy shit. And the cymbal work and the tom work and the fills, just everything about it, like it was just game changing for me. And so then I went home and I downloaded that album off LimeWire. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes.
Sorry, Avenged Sevenfold. Yeah, probably only got 1 or 2 viruses from downloading that. Yeah, and then I just thrashed it. And at the same time, as it happened, my best friends from primary school, we all kind of discovered the band ourselves at that same time as well. Next minute, we were all learning Avenged Sevenfold songs, or trying to, because they were about 10 times harder than anything we'd played before that. But, you know, from then on, it was like, okay, I need to learn to play metal. I don't think if I'd heard the drumming on that album just stood out so much. It's really hard for me to say if, and yeah, and all the other pieces were there. Like, it's really hard for me to say if I actually would have even ended up playing metal drums if it hadn't been for that album. Like, I mean, there's, you know, albums like, say, like Slipknot Volume 3 or Lamb of God Sacrament, like definitely would have still had a huge impact on me and did. But like, you know that first one that really crosses you over, where it's almost like the equivalent for me of when I first heard Take Off Your Pants and Jacket by Blink-182, you know, like as like a drumming album that made me obsessed with like learning a style, you know, probably, yeah, I'd say it's probably comparable to that.
Oh, that's super interesting. And like the fact that you only had a couple songs to begin with and then thrash those and was like, yeah, hell yeah. I found, going back to my youth, lol, but because everyone shares music and it's always a couple songs from here and there and here and there. So how did you go from a couple of songs to listening to the entire album? Were you sort of like, I don't know, I get really attached to certain songs and then other songs don't really stand up as much, I guess. And I'm like, oh, a little bit disappointed. Back in the day, I'm different now. So when you first heard the entire album as a whole, did it change anything for you, I guess?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a really good question.
Straight off
it's
the
funny.
bat.
Yeah, no, great. Off the dome. I mean, it's funny. I think back then that was my normal way of consuming music because I didn't buy a lot of CDs. You know, being 12 years old and obsessed with music, you discover free downloading and you're going to do what you're going to do. So yeah, I guess what I would do is I would get albums sometimes. I would sometimes buy CDs, but like downloading a few songs was like a test the waters with a band for me. So I wouldn't necessarily go out and I have a lot of respect for those people who would like talk about that old school way of like finding bands where they just pick an album based off like a record store guy's recommendation or they like the artwork and they go home and they just commit to it. and they just force themselves to listen to it until they love it because they bought it, right? So I like maybe only did that once or twice in my life. And it's really, I would kind of hear about a band, download a couple of singles that were recommended to me. And then once I kind of got my head around those and I decided I liked it enough, then I would try and kind of build the collection up and fill in the gaps in the album. But what was really funny about that is that you would end up with albums that were missing tracks, or albums where one of the tracks was like 5 to be softer or louder, or was super distorted or shot quality, like a really fucked up quality. And yeah, so you wouldn't always get the best experience. Or I would realize that after like 3 years of listening to an album, I'd be missing a couple of songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get, it's interesting. I did have that syndrome that you talk about a little bit because of that. You could almost call it like single syndrome, where you get too many good singles off a record, and then when you hear the whole album, it just doesn't quite live up to that for you, because albums need variety, and maybe all the singles they put out just happen to be the ones that fit into the most marketable style, and that happened to be what you liked, or whatever. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons. Like, I think sometimes it's also just that you can never replicate that first time hearing a band. Like the song that does it, like you can just never replicate that. Like I think back, there are so many bands that I think back on, and just like the first time I heard that one song and just went, what is this? Like, or even sometimes hearing it and not getting it, and then getting it after a week later and suddenly feeling like enlightened. like you've just kind of transcended something and finally understand that weird piece of music you heard last week. Like it's really hard to replicate that. And I guess like, you can get that within an album. Like you can get halfway through an album and be surprised somewhat. But I feel like, that initial impact of being introduced to an artist through that one song that happens to capture you is, we kind of always chase it afterwards, don't we? We're always, it hurts sometimes with your favorite bands. Hey, when you're like, I know that this band's new record is amazing and I know I will grow to love it, but all I want to feel is what I felt when I was 16 and I heard them for the first time. And it's like, it can never be done. But I guess with this album, just to get off that little existential tangent, with this one, I guess I heard Blinded in Chains, and that was just insane. And then I started coming across some other stuff because my friends were like, have you heard that band? And I was like, yeah, my cousin showed me them. This guy at school showed me them. And then the next couple of songs I would have heard would have probably been like Beast and the Harlot and Backcountry, which were, they're the singles. So Blinded in Chains wasn't a single. And that's why it's weird that I heard it first.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I love talking about that song so much, because it's a really, like I said, it's oh my God, it's 6.5 minutes long. I just looked. It's 6.5 minutes long. It's crazy. Like that, they're really a progressive band on that. Like if you look at that album, it's basically a prog album. Like it's so incredibly prog when you get down to it. It's so many songs that don't have any repeating parts, or where the repeating parts are 6 minutes apart from each other and completely different by the time they come back. So like, even, that song was very much not a single, but then even the singles are like really weird too. They're all over 5 minutes. So the next songs I heard was like Beast and the Harlot and Backcountry, which are, they're amazing songs. Beast and the Harlot, again, I think at that point, I don't even know if I'd fully got my head around I think I had got my head around the double kick thing. So then I'm just hearing this guy just do these straight 16th notes for like 35 seconds straight. And I was like, I hope one day in my life I can play that. That's a benchmark for a decade from now. And I played that song, for days and days and days and hours and weeks, like trying to get that down. And it became such a big, like, a benchmark for me. And then Backcountry is really different as well. It's like got this weird kind of double time punk feel. It's in a weird, I don't know what the scale is. I keep forgetting. It's not like, it's like I don't know, like Dorian mode or something. I'm talking shit, but it's in like a really unusual scale. And all these weird kind of punk beats, then like a dance beat in the chorus and everything. So again, super weird. Ends with this kind of big play out with acoustics layered in there and orchestration. Like every second song on this record has like acoustic guitar layered into an epic outro and violins, and there's like harps and organs in there, I'm pretty sure.
That's so prog, literally.
It's just gnarly. It's just so insane. Like for a band on their second album to have done that. Like, like the composition just out the door. But yeah, sorry, going back to your question, it was from there, it's getting my head around those singles, slowly line wiring the other songs to build a whole collection, realizing the album was in the wrong order and reordering them.
Oh, wow.
So I could hear it as it was intended because, LimeWire will do that. And then, just kind of over the next couple of years, I just fell so in love with this record. I mean, look, there are some songs, I was going through the list today, and there are some songs I go, man, I kind of forgot about that one. But I've realized there's actually not a single track on here I would skip. And there's maybe, like, even on the following album of theirs, which I love, there are a couple of songs I tend to jump over. But this one, I don't know, there's not a single song that slows it down enough for me to, or I guess loses what I love about it enough for me to skip it. Like, even the lesser known songs on this, I think the musicianship and the composition just stands out so much. Yeah, that's the big thing about this album for me, is I think it's the composition and the musicianship, like, above everything, is just defines this record for me.
That's awesome. I will definitely have to listen out for that. And the drumming as well, because it's not like, I mean, I don't really know too much about drums and drumming and everything, but it sounds very cool.
I'll give you a tip with the drumming. Just, if you want to imagine, like, if you want to feel how crazy the drumming is, just try to imagine yourself sitting in the chair and your hands and feet doing what he's doing. Like, put headphones on and just, like, visualize that you're behind that drum kit and try to comprehend how you would possibly get from here to here. And I mean, and this guy's playing like a 16-piece drum kit as well. So, but it's so cool. Like, just to get crazy about the drumming. Like, I mean, it's like, it introduced me to not only double kick, but, using splash cymbals, just putting splashes and effect cymbals into fills in unusual ways. Offbeat cymbal hits, like offbeat China hits to accent like the upbeats of a part when you're going really heavy. Things that I kind of later then heard done in other ways by bands like August Burns Red, for example, like Matt Greiner. Now, and I have no idea if he was influenced by the Rev from Avenged Sevenfold, but some of the techniques that I kind of first started to somewhat digest in Avenged, then I would hear them done in a much more extreme way by bands that were even more technical and more out of the box, like ABR. So, but I feel like a lot of people these days, I mean, because the guy passed away in 2009, the drummer, the Rev. So he was like, like an all-time hero for me, like, honestly, like a goat in metal to me. And there are so many people nowadays who are, you could definitely say are, way better technically and stuff than that, but the creativity in what he was doing, like, and the finesse and the dynamics in it, just playing really out of the box stuff. And it's very ADD drumming. It's very, like, constantly shifting. Like, I look at it and I just go, that's why I play the way I do. Like, I've started to realize, looking at kind of going back to some of my favorite bands that I still like to jam on drums, like Avenged and Slipknot, like after Joey passed away recently, which was heartbreaking. After he passed away, when I went back and started playing Slipknot songs, I was like, I've just realized all these tricks I have are from Slipknot. Like, all of these little flares I add into my snare work, or little double kick flares I throw in there to spice a part up, are so influenced by Joey. And then there's so many others that are influenced by Jimmy from Avenged. So it was a life-changing album for me drumming wise. I gotta say that again. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, like, looking back, now as adults, looking back on like a childhood favorite and realizing that it like influenced your drumming as well, is now the time when you're like, that was actually, like, I knew it was important, I knew I loved it, knew it was a great album, but now I realize how much of an important album it was to me at the time, and still is, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the funny thing is, like, I genuinely, like, I look back on a lot of albums by other artists as honestly being responsible for me having a career in music. Like, genuinely, like, I can honestly say, like, a big part of why I have a career playing metalcore music is because I heard Horizons by Parkway, and because I heard this album, City of Evil by Avenged. It's definitely up there with all of those. And I look at it and I go, well, if I hadn't heard those records at that time and had that drive to want to replicate what I was hearing because it was so exciting, I probably would have still been playing music because I've always played music. But even, I can trace that right back to hearing American Idiot for the first time, or Enema of the State as well, which were probably the first albums that really did that for me. So, yeah, I mean, to look back on the influence of anyone like that, like Jimmy from Avenged, or Joey, or Travis, or Trey Cool, or Ringo, or any of these other people. Because yeah, Beatles honestly were a huge band for me in my early drumming days, because my mum's a big Beatles fan, and so I look back on all these guys and I'm like, there's so much of your playing and your style that you can trace back to those people. And like, yeah, I think, we're all products of our favorite players, whether we want to admit it or not. Like, I think all you can really do as an artist is give credit where credit's due, and like give respect to the people that did what you were doing before you did it. Yeah, when I look back on a record like this, I hear some of these fills and I've been like, I remember, I've kind of copied that, haven't I? Yeah, I kind of, and some of them are obvious, some of them are almost deliberate. Like, there's this fill in Backcountry, there's like what you call a herder fill, which is like a particular drumming pattern, and he does it with the toms and the snare a couple of times in Backcountry, I think in a few other songs. He also does it with the kicks in like a 2-bar double kick solo in the middle of that song Blinded in Chains, which is one of the most insane things to throw into it. Like, it's just this ridiculous little solo using these things called herders, which are these little kind of gallopy patterns in the feet, and it sounds so ridiculous. I kind of, probably the first time I ever heard that, and then I discovered years later that's what is done in that song Bleed by Meshuggah. That's kind of like this, a standard milestone for double kick these days. Like, it's a real true benchmark, and it's a brutal benchmark too. And that is, that little figure that he's doing there on Cycle in Meshuggah's Bleed. First time I ever heard anyone really even just do that for a brief second with their feet was in this Avenged song. And now I use it in a couple of our songs. I do it in the breakdown of Pray for Rain, in just like a little moment. Yeah, you find those little things. I find these fill ideas and stuff that I'm like, oh yeah, he did that too. Yeah, that was that's totally borrowed. It's funny to look back on.
We've just found your origin story.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very open about my musical origin story. Yeah, man, it's just I just borrow from all my favorite players and then combine it together. I mean, but that's all anyone does.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just put them in a pot and then just see what I want to do with them. That's kind of the way I look at it. It's not like everything we do is just borrowed, but it's like you take all those things, you make a hybrid of them, and then you consciously and subconsciously take the pieces that you like, and then you inject your own personality and taste into it across that, and then it becomes yours. So yeah, I mean, a lot of those guys I've just named such big foundations in my drumming for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a cooking analogy in there somewhere,
Oh yes. There's yeah. I feel like that's the thing I've discovered recently. These areas of interest in my life, they tend to cross back and forth. Drums and cooking, it's all the same. Really.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think like, just thinking about like how ambitious the record is as well, right? So the first song has a drum solo in the middle of it, which is like, yeah, it's a short drum solo. It's maybe like a 25-second drum solo with like guitars ringing over it, but it's still insanely show-offy to put in an opening song. The opening song, I think it has 2 guitar solos in it, and I think a lot of their songs have multiple solos, which is definitely like a big thing that separates them from a lot of bands these days. And then there's a fucking key change at the end, like a Bon Jovi key change. You know what I mean? Like when you listen to like 80 or like a Journey key change. When you listen to 80s rock and it hits the third chorus.
Yes.
And they just go, whoa, we're halfway. They just take it up to that next key. They go up the semitone or the tone or whatever. Yeah, I feel like now my mind is blanking. I can't remember whether it's usually done with a tone or a semitone. I feel like one of them would sound shit, and now my brain can't tell me anymore. But
we wouldn't know anyway.
Yeah, they do. They do like the classic, like the 80s rock key change in a metal song in 2005 in the opening track as well. Like, it's so cheesy. It's like the cheesiest thing I've ever heard, and I think that's the best thing about it. Like, one thing about this band is that they're really divisive these days, and they always have been. Like, they're one of the biggest metal bands of like the last couple of decades, but they, at the same time, I mean, like any big band, but a lot more than some others, they're very divisive, and they're one of those bands that's really not for everyone. And a lot of people that don't like them really don't like them. I mean, in my band, the majority of our band is like hugely about this band, especially this era of this band, but one or two of the guys never got their heads around it. So it's like, the thing is, it's like, whether you get the sound or not, though, the ambition of what they're doing and the creativity of it is like, I just think you can't ignore it objectively. You know, I can understand like why some people find the vocals necessarily not to their taste, because Matt Shadows has got a really unusual voice, a whole record of clean vocals. Like he'd done clean vocals on the last record, but they sounded fairly different. It was like a blend of screamed and sung. And the music was like, the scales they were riding around were mostly a little bit more standard, like just standard kind of like melodic and harmonic minor. And then I think they started getting a little bit more kooky on this record as well. So like even just the types of melodies they're following, and then the grit that he's putting on his voice, and the fact that it's an entire album of singing, is I can understand why some people who are necessarily heavier fans wouldn't really digest it that well. And like, I mean, it's even funny. I was thinking the other day, like the crazy thing about this record is that they were one of the first big bands to go from screaming, screaming and singing as a blend, to moving to all singing. And like, you know, that's kind of like the fear that every heavy fan has for their favorite bands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, it's such a contentious move. And like every band, and back then a lot of bands were doing it too. I think Atreyu was starting to transition down that road. Bullet for My Valentine got to a stage where they didn't do much screaming either. A lot of these guys as well were like damaging their voices from screaming. So like Shadows had to have surgery on his voice, on his vocal cords rather. I'm pretty sure Matt Tuck had surgery on his vocal cords. A lot of these guys have had nodules or some kind of vocal cord surgery at some point. So the dude literally changed his entire singing technique. And I think that a lot of people believed, whether, you know, to some extent, that they changed their sound because he couldn't scream anymore because he damaged his voice. But the way the band has always put it, in like what I've always read around the album and the interviews and stuff, is that they always planned to, over time, kind of taper the screaming down and taper the singing up until it became just a sung band, because that's what he wanted to do, because he has a great voice. I'm sure some people think that's bullshit. I mean, personally, I believe it. I honestly don't think most bands tend to lie to fans about their motivations for their sounds. Honestly, like that might be naive of me, but I really think like most bands, if they want to change their sound, they do it. If they have to change it for another reason, unless it's the label told us to, they'll usually be honest about it. And I was like, it makes a lot of sense when you look at their music, because their music is so melodically driven. They're not a breakdowns band, you know? There's a couple of breakdowns on that record, but like they're not a band that's written to be, you know, it's not written for hardcore shows, at least the later stuff. So the earlier stuff was a little bit more. But what's crazy is like, you know, I'm sure a lot of people were kind of freaking out around that time. You know, one of their favorite bands is moving away from the heavier stuff. And regardless of like whatever the reason was for that, though, the cool thing was like on this record, they did that, but they didn't compromise the intensity of the instrumentals like at all, which is really rare. Like most bands, when they transition from being a more screaming dominated band to a more sung band, the instrumentals tend to get simpler as well. And it makes total sense, because it's a lot easier to write clean vocals over instrumentals that are a bit more straightforward. One of the reasons why screamed vocals work in metal is because when the instruments are that busy, it's really, really hard to write melodic vocals that don't disrupt the instruments or aren't disrupted by the instruments. But so you can put screamed stuff over the most technical shit ever, and they balance each other out because your ears tune into, you know, the melodic nature of what's underneath it. And then, you know, the screams just kind of form this texture over the top. But like this Avenged album is just nuts, because it's like instrumentally, it's way more over the top and insane than the previous record. And they've said it in a lot of interviews too, that they were like, we just decided to take what was most exciting about our band and just like make it a caricature, almost like exaggerate it so much that you were just like, holy shit. Like, so they just took the harmonized guitar parts and just did them like 4 times as much in the record. And they put octaves on almost every vocal for layers. They harmonized the absolute shit out of stuff. I think, actually, I don't think they were doing they might've been doing the guitarists on backup vocals on the records at that point too. I'm not sure. They started doing that later. But yeah, it's just such a larger than life version of the original thing. So they didn't really compromise the instrumentals at all. And then they also started introducing all this insane like orchestral stuff and classical guitar. Like there's a flamenco outro that's like 1.5 minutes long on one of the songs. Like it's just a flamenco solo with timbales and Latin percussion going on behind it as well.
What?
Like I think it's a song called Sidewinder. Like it's just absolutely insane. But to take a record like that and be like, if you heard this song instrumentally all the way through, you would almost certainly think there was going to be screams over it, you know?
Yeah, okay.
Like I had that thought this morning. Like if I heard this record totally instrumentally and tried to imagine what vocals would go over it, there's no way I would picture entirely sung vocals for this, like hour of music or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because it's a damn long record too. Yeah, that to me just makes it's so brave. Like it's actually, that sounded really cheesy of me. Like it's so brave.
So brave.
But it's
They did such a good job.
It's it's stunning and it's brave. It's but it's so, it really is like a ballsy move. Like everything about this record, it's like a no fucks given record. And that's why I think this record is like, it blows my mind. Like these guys signed to Warner and then made this. Or they did. Yeah, they made their last record, got signed to Warner, licensed Waking the Fallen to Warner, I think, and then put this out.
Well, like,
and
lol, we're changing stuff up. Don't be alarmed.
Well, yeah, and it's weird, you know. And I think it would have caused such a stir because, you know, people, it was a change, right? You know, they were less heavy in a lot of ways, but like, it's not like the thing for this album is like, you know, if anybody was to say that this is a selling out album, I think that's just the most laughable thing I've ever heard. Like, honestly, I look at that and I'm like, they charted maybe like 30 on the Billboard charts and Backcountry was on MTV, and Backcountry is a 5.5 minute song on MTV. That's not selling out. Like that's the beautiful thing about it is it's like they did everything that shouldn't have worked in mainstream, and yet they got mainstream success over it. And that's the total opposite of selling out to me. It's like, if I don't feel like I can't imagine anybody in a major label saying, hey, can you make a record that sounds like this? We think that's what's going to sell. Please change your sound and sound like this. Because nobody could have ever imagined a record like this. Like, I think what's really cool about this record is that, you know how I was saying before, like, personally, like I try to really be open about like the influences on my music, and I really love when you can hear bands and tell where they're drawing their influences from.
Yes.
And also when they're really honest about it too, when they don't try to hide it. I think what's really cool with these guys is like so much of this record, it draws so heavily from classic metal as well. And I feel like that's why it stood out as well. You know, a lot of the other bands at the time, everything they were doing was very much coming from like the core scene and more heavily influenced by like the emo movement of the time and the post-hardcore movement of the time, as well as obviously kind of like that European metal influence and the European death metal influence which is where obviously some of those like harmony ideas and stuff seemingly came from. But then, you know, what Avenged were doing that I think really opened them up to a way, way bigger crowd than a lot of the bands from that Warped Tour scene, because Avenged really started in like what you would consider like the Warped Tour scene. Yeah, they were touring. If you watch their early videos, you know, they look like a very different band. And they look much more, it's much more of a close to like that emo look from the time. You know, there's eyeliner, they're all in black. They've got like the studded belts, like, you know, it's very much of that time. And the hair too, they've got these black fringes, like, you know, coming off to the side. It's really, really peak, you know, 2004 emo in that look. But what's really cool about this record is it's like, you can see them starting to be like, what we really love is classic metal. And all the other bands of that time were, you know, when Avenged started doing it, and I'm not saying they were all doing it for the, you know, copying each other, but it did start to seep into other bands around that time too. But I think Avenged were the first band to really like throw in like blatant Iron Maiden influences into the metalcore movement. You know what I mean? At least in my eyes, I'm sure other people were doing it, but it really stood out. Like there's just some straight up Iron Maiden parts on this record, and some like kind of some Slayer parts as well. And there's parts that remind me a lot of Metallica. In fact, the opening of Blind and in Chains, that song I was talking about, is directly basically lifted from the middle of One by Metallica. It's just a rhythm, but it's directly the same rhythm and kick part. You know, it really shows much more of an appreciation to, I guess, metal's origins in a lot of ways than to like the bands of its own time. And I think that's why it stood out too, because everyone else was borrowing off each other. And meanwhile, Avenged Sevenfold at that time really just like pulled together an album that showcased a lot of what people loved about metal from a decade or two ago. So not only do you have all these young, the crazy thing about this band and why I think it worked, like it's such a right time, right place thing in a lot of ways. Obviously the music was going to go well regardless, but them exploding, it's like they had all of the things that, you know, the dad rockers of metal and the slightly older generation of metal could get into. You know, they had the true musicianship, great guitar work, huge stage presence. They started doing pyrotechnics and crazy visuals. They had all the theatricity. I don't know. I used that word last night and I don't know if it's real. Yeah, they all the theatrics. They had all the theatrics of like Motley Crue and almost, maybe not Motley Crue, but like of you know, a lot of your 80s bands and stuff at some points. And yet their image was heavily drawing from like the emo movement of the time and the post-hardcore movement of the time. But then combine it with the fact that these guys could play their instruments at a level at least equal to the best thrash bands. So you've got the visuals, like the visuals of glam rock and stadium rock meets emo combined with like the sound of classic metal and a bit of a modern twist. So you've basically just pulled together fans from like a whole bunch of different corners and different ages too. You get those young kids that are drawn in by the look of the way those guys were dressing back then. I remember my best friend in primary school started wearing black fingerless gloves because he wanted to, and a fucking fedora because he wanted to look like Sim Gates. It was amazing. Because he was a sick guitarist and he was like, cool, I'm going to wear this hat. And eventually, we made enough jokes about it, but he stopped. But yeah, like everyone was, you know, that having something like that you could attach to, you know, if you were coming from a variety of different perspectives in music as well. And then I had friends at school who were just like nerds from my music class who I kind of kept telling them to listen to this band until they realized how cool the instrumental aspect was, you know, like there's so much that you can kind of attach to with a band like that. And I think, you know, in terms of what I was saying about the younger generation being able to attach to like the emo look and the whole visual, a lot of what else played into that as well is that they really did a great job of like building a culture around the band and like what would you call it? Almost like a mythology, not a mythology, but like
I know
their image was just so marketable. So like, you know, it's something that I consider very cheesy nowadays. And I considered it cheesy at the time too, but I kind of loved it. Like they all had stage names and you can compare it to, like Motley Crue or something like that. Like they had these larger than life, like almost caricature personalities with these, what is it? M Shadows, Zacky Vengeance, Sinister Gates, the Reverend Tholomew Plague, and Johnny Christ. Like
heavy.
it's so ridiculous. But yeah, to a kid my age, that's badass. They were like comic book characters. You know, they're like, it's awesome. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love how much you love this album, and that makes me want to go and listen to it. So I need to throw this on. But what are my listening notes? How should I listen to this album?
Okay, I would probably there's a part of me that wants to say go watch a live video first, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a recommendation. Just to almost get I almost kind of want you to have like a visual in your head when you watch it. Maybe you need to watch the music video for Backcountry. Mm-hmm. It's because it's silly. It's really silly, but like it gives the song a vibe. And you should watch Beats of the Heart live in Long Beach, California.
Okay. Just
to get an idea of what this band looks like when they play live and how great of a show it is. Because this that's like the opening track of the record, and it's such a big song. Like it really, the opening is like truly epic. It's these huge chords and church bells hitting and stuff. And yeah, I mean, they literally come out of the gates with, is it church bells or just piano? I think there's a bit of a bell there. I could be wrong. But yeah, I'd say get that for a bit of a visual idea of what, you know, the energy is of the band. And then I would say, and yeah, the video for Backcountry is real silly. Like it's very 80s glam rock. Like they're like driving around in like I don't know, some
Convertible
big
or
like
something.
muscle car, like a muscle car. Yeah, like a convertible muscle car, like drinking Jack Daniels with strippers, and there's like bats flying around everywhere, and there's all this imagery borrowing from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the book by Hunter S. Thompson. Yeah, it's it's so
Wow.
ridiculous. Like I keep saying. But I reckon, yeah, when you're listening to it, you just really want to, I'd say, try and tune into the layering. Try and pay attention to, you want to be able to kind of cast your ear between different things. So like, just try and take moments to like tune into the guitar for a little bit, or when it grabs your ear, really tune into the guitar doing something special, or really pay attention to when the drums are doing something really ferocious. And then in like the bigger sections, the bigger, more open sections, try to listen to the orchestration, because you're going to hear like acoustic guitars, pretty much like full symphony orchestras. I think maybe some organs and harps in there. You also hear a bunch of percussion, like there's some timbales, and I think maybe like some congas in one of the songs. Yeah, and I feel, look, I feel like I have neglected the end of the record a little bit in the songs I've talked about, because I've mainly named the singles, but like the second half of the record is definitely much lesser known. Like obviously most records tend to stack the singles at the front, but yeah, I mean the back half has that one sidewinder with the flamenco outro. There's like, yeah, like Wicked End is like opens with this insane drum beat and guitar interaction that's really cool. There's like I mean, I even forgot about like Seize the Day is just a straight ballad. Like these guys also kind of that sounds almost like a Guns N' Roses ballad, you know? You can really hear that influence in some of the songs as well, just like the more even classic rock rather than classic metal. So I feel like, yeah, there's songs like that. And then they end with a song that's pretty much just their version of The Trooper by Iron Maiden, which is called MIA. And I don't know if other people look at it that way, but it's like a song about being a soldier in the army. And which is exactly what The Trooper is about by Iron Maiden. And it has these guitar harmonies and like drum beat, this like gallop drum beat, where in my mind, when I listen to this song, I kind of just tell myself like, this is like their tribute to it's The Trooper by Iron Maiden. And I don't know if it is, but
Yeah.
it's a very cool song. I think it's actually very underrated too, like a lot of the stuff in the second half of that record, but it's 8 minutes and 50 seconds long. So
Wow. I'm excited.
maybe not everyone gets there. You better put aside some time, man. I'll say, like, you better like.
I think I'm going to have to. It's going to have to be like me alone with my thoughts, listening to this album. I don't know, I'll go for a walk or something just so I can zone out to the world, not to the album. But yeah.
As I've obviously rambled about this for a very, very long time, do you mind if I ask you some questions? Because I'm curious, like, because I want to know what you're going to get going into this. Yeah. No, I want to know I guess what you'll be going into this with. So you've heard some Avenged Sevenfold or none?
I don't recall. I honestly don't remember ever intentionally listening to an Avenged Sevenfold song. Maybe it's come on the radio. Okay. I wouldn't know.
Did you ever play Guitar Hero back in the day?
Not a lot. No, I never had it.
I was going to say that's another thing which really made this record explode was this, I think Backcountry was on Guitar Hero. Okay. Could have been another song though. They've had a couple of songs on there. And so again, yeah, that was that beautiful melting pot where metal bands were getting introduced to all the normies around the world because of Guitar Hero. So, but let me think. What would you say is like one of the faster or more technical bands that you enjoy?
Dream Theater.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay.
I mean...
You like Dream Theater? That's a good one then. Okay, I was not expecting that was where you were going to go.
Haha.
But that's good because this is a super proggy album.
Yeah, I really enjoyed prog.
Okay.
I did, fun fact, an elective in uni called Progressive Rock, and we just sat in a classroom for 3 hours on a Friday morning and watched music videos the entire time. So that's where I developed that love. And Dream Theater was, amazing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, so I mean, Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater, or ex-drummer of Dream Theater, was Avenged Drummers, the Rev, one of his favorite drummers of all time, one of his drumming heroes. Oh. And after he died, Mike Portnoy then became the drummer for Avenged Sevenfold for about a year or so.
Oh.
Full circle. Yeah. Crazy. So, but if you like Dream Theater and you appreciate Mike's drumming style, either Mike, because there's two Mikes that have played drums in that band, yeah, you'd probably find a little bit more to digest in Avenged Sevenfold in that case. Yeah, because it's, like I said, it's really like, you could really call it a prog album. It'd be hard to argue that it's not a prog album, really.
Yeah, right.
And because it's funny, like these days Avenged get lumped in with like I feel like a lot of people lump them in with almost this kind of dad metal sound, you know, because they're a bit more hard rock sounding, which is the direction that they've gone. But you know, yeah, back then it's like it's much easier to compare them to these really fast and intense bands. Is there anything else that you think might be down that line? Dream Theater?
I mean, going down the prog stuff that I like and have learned, I thought Yes was pretty cool. Very proggy, but
Okay.
also, and it's maybe not the drums,
Actually,
but it's
never
like
listened to
it's the
Yes.
keys.
Never listened to them. That's actually, I know they're a band I'm supposed to know. I definitely need to check them out.
I don't know. I just think when you say technical and like fast, you go for that. I would go into that area. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I would say maybe I reckon listen to this album as if you're trying to like when you listen to Dream Theater, do you try and really like actively digest what's going on and like really tune into all the intricacies of it? Like, do you try to, or do you just kind of listen to it as a whole? Because everyone's different with prog.
I would listen as a whole first,
Yeah.
and then go back and be like, oh,
Yeah. But so with progressive music, yeah, do you enjoy kind of like, yeah, I guess, you know, digesting the detail of it over time and trying to hear all the intricacies?
Yeah.
Because if you do, like, I think maybe I'll say try and listen to this record. Like, I wouldn't normally think to say this, but just, yeah, it's actually great that you've said that. I reckon try and listen to this record like you're trying to digest a Dream Theater album.
cool.
Because I think now, and that's, some people would probably think that's a really weird thing to say about Avenged Sevenfold, but you know, it's like, it's a prog record really in my eyes. And I think that if you digest it through that lens, you're going to hear the genius of the compositions earlier on, rather than if you just kind of listen to it and go like, oh, like, do I like this hook or not? Because it's really hooky too. Like it's it's catchy as hell. Like, and that is the wild thing. Like these 6-minute long songs with 3 solos in it and double kick everywhere. And yet the vocal parts are very memorable. But yeah, I guess if you listen to it like you're listening to like a mainstream metal record, it's probably not going to necessarily come across the same way, or you might not pick up on the details for a few listens. But I think if you try to digest it like you're listening to something really crazy and technical and progressive, you'll feel a lot more of it, I think.
Awesome.
But then also maybe another thing is though, also some of these songs just kind of like feel like party songs. Like Backcountry kind of feels like, yeah, like that's why I want you to watch the video. That's why I wanted you to watch that video. Because I put that song on in the car last night. I listened to the whole album in the car last night just to kind of refresh my brain a bit. And as soon as that song comes on, I low-key just want to floor the accelerator. Not that I would ever do that. But yeah, I think one of the songs was even, I think Blood and in Chains was even in Need for Speed Underground or something, which is, I'm pretty sure, how Rick from my band got into Avenged Sevenfold as well, because they're like a mutual favorite band for us. So yeah, there's something about them that also makes me want to kind of drive really fast down a highway. There's a lot of imagery you can conjure up with this record. Yeah, anything from like rock star partying to, I don't know, like biblical apocalypse visions, because so much of the lyrics as well is just like drawn from the Bible, which is another thing about this band, is like those first 2 albums are just full of biblical metaphors, including the band's name, like everything about them. Yeah, sounding the 7th trumpet and all of that. They're all just Bible verses, just kind of twisted to sound a bit darker. Yeah, because I mean, the Bible is full of some really, really dark and awful stuff. So it's a great material for metal, really is.
Wow. What an album. This is insane. Yeah. I've never, I guess, heard of Avenged Sevenfold in this light before, like ever. So it's yeah, really eye-opening.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. I feel like I'll fight to the death for these first 3 albums. I really would. Like I will ride or die for these albums. After that, they're great records, but they're just not, I don't have the attachment to them. Whereas these, like, yeah, I love it when I'll like get into a conversation with somebody else who, you know, other friends from other bands or friends from the industry who are like, oh yeah, like I know everybody, like a lot of people rip on that band sometimes, but I absolutely ride for that band. Like yeah, I have a few friends who said the same thing to me, and they're like, oh, like I wouldn't be playing drums if it was not for that record or one of the other records. So yeah, I take a bit of pride in yammering about this record until people decide they have no choice but to appreciate it just to stop me from talking. But, yeah, it's good fun.
Oh, all right. Well, there we have it. The one metal album that Daniel Furnari thinks that you and I should listen to is City of Evil by Avenged Sevenfold. Dan, thank you so much for your wisdom. I can't wait to listen to it from your point of view.
I'm so excited to hear what you think about it. Please email me and tell me your feedback. I want a track by track run through. No, you don't
Okay.
have to do that. But no, I'm excited for you to hear it. I also am sure that some people will hear this and think I'm totally full of shit and this album is not all I'm cracking it up to be. And some other people will maybe go away and listen to it for the first time and go, he might have overrated it a little bit. But that is, I do not care. Everything I've said about this record, I totally stand by. Like,
yeah, it's your
and
opinion.
like I said, if you, yeah, but I mean, but even beyond that, like I really think that anybody who can't hear anything, at least of, you know, of interest or value or like worthy of respect in the, you know, the musicality on the record, it's honestly should listen to it again because there's stuff in there for days. But yeah, you gotta have some fun. Listen to a fast and thrashy and crazy record.